Alright guys, welcome back. We have another data mine today. It is the newest Italian event, Aquilifer's Ballade. I'm not going to go over the patch notes in this video because that was covered in the live stream, which I have the full archive here, as well as a 1-minute summary here in case you need it shorter. That being said, here is one skin that was in the data mine but not in the live stream. So I'll cover over the event first. Map drop wise, there is nothing that exciting. The D3 Italian gun is already attainable from the War Archive, and nothing else is really that exciting. I guess if you are a newer player, you could grind D2 if you're a little bit low on gold steam catapults. Otherwise, I'd recommend you grind D3 for a chance at an SR drop, and for the most points to spend in the event shop. The event shop has no new equipment, but it is the first event to have PR5 prints. The only equipment is the World Invitation. This has already been in the game files, but nobody will have been able to obtain it until today. It provides 13 firepower and 16 evasion at plus 11, as well as if it's equipped on a non-Italian ship that's in a fleet with Vittorio Veneto, then it gets an additional buff. If it's in the Vanguard, the ship that it's equipped on, it will increase its own firepower, torpedo, and evasion by 10%. If it's a main fleet ship, it'll increase its firepower, aviation, and hit stat by 8%. This equipment is basically meant for mafia fleets, where you have Vittorio Veneto, and then some other ships such as New Jersey or Anchorage. It's an interesting item to come out during an Italian event, because obviously this shouldn't be equipped on any Italian ship ever, which is all the new ships that we are getting. So you wouldn't use them on any of the ships we're getting today, but maybe it will be used in some sort of mafia fleet or another fleet in which uses Vittorio Veneto and non-Italian ships. And with that, let's move on to the ships. So let's start off with the banner ship, the battleship Roma. Stat-wise, Roma looks very similar to Vittorio Veneto. She has a little bit extra health, but that is offset by less luck. Damage-wise, she's looking the same, as well as her equipment looks very similar to Vittorio Veneto as well. So effectively, base-wise, they're the same. So let's move on to the skills and see what she has. Veneto has very good skills. Let's see what Roma brings to the table. Skill number 1, she has a 75% chance to proc a barrage when she fires her main guns. So she is a barrage battleship. When they fail, so that's the 25% chance that they fail, main gun damage for that salvo is increased by 20%, and enemies hit by the salvo are slowed by 30% for 5 seconds, and that can't stack. This is a really good failed barrage bonus. It gives you extra damage to offset not having the barrage, and it gives you a slow. In some cases, you might even want to not have the barrage proc. It's an interesting one because there's another ship that I remember that has a skill like that, and that's Anchorage, where you necessarily don't want her skill to proc. And so that's interesting. This barrage looks pretty good. Moving on to her second skill, we start off with a firepower and hit stat get increased by 15%. This is a very boring part of that skill, but that is actually pretty significant. 15% on hit and firepower is very nice and puts her damage output probably above Veneto at this point because they have similar base stats. Also, at the start of battle and every 20 seconds after, proc a sonar scan that reveals enemy subs for 8 seconds. Every 10 seconds or every enemy killed grants crit rate and damage rate plus 5%, stacks 3 times max. So that's a 15% increase to crit rate and crit damage. We're getting a 15% increase to hit stat as well. Okay, this skill is kind of gimmicky, but I think it's very good. So this sonar scan is obviously only for moments when you are dealing with enemy submarines, not something you're going to use in PvP. This is really, I mean, submarines are really only a factor in like World 14 and towards the end, and maybe in future content like World 15 that will come out eventually. So that part seems kind of gimmicky, but it is a guaranteed reveal of enemy subs, and it happens at the start of battle and continuously. So I actually like this. This could be used very nicely as like a mob fleet in World 14 because of this skill. Additionally, who does not like having 15% crit damage and crit rate? That's so nice. So it actually has 2 things. So if she kills a bunch of enemies, like in a mob fleet, she can stack that really quickly. She just gets to kill 3 things, which should be actually fairly easy if, say, she's in a mob fleet. But if, you know, she's in a situation where she can't get the 3 kills because you're in an instantly spawning boss and there's nothing to kill around it or something like that, every 10 seconds she can get the stack as well. So that means by 30 seconds into the battle, she's going to have her max 15% crit damage too, which is still impactful because even for boss fights, 30 seconds is still early enough for it to matter. So this is actually a pretty good skill, although kind of gimmicky. Let's move on to her last skill. When alive, enemy torpedo stat is minus -8%. That goes on theme with the Italians being anti-submarine faction. That makes sense. It's not torpedo damage though, it's torpedo stats, so that's actually worse than a lot of the other Italians, but you know, it's there. Her first main gun salvo reload time is reduced by 30% if there are 3 Sardinia ships in the fleet. Okay, that's really good, so she fires at the 70% mark. This is actually really nice. We always like those early strikes, and this one's a little bit later. It's not as early as Veneto, who, you know, you can reduce by having 3 Italians by a lot. This one actually comes a little bit later. So if, per se, you were in a situation where you had Aquila, Vittorio Veneto, and Roma together as your backline, you're going to have a nice schedule of damage. You're going to have the preload from Aquila, then Veneto's going to come at the 20% or 80% reduction to her cooldown, and then you're going to have Aquila, who has a cooldown reduction to fire there, and also Roma will have a 30% reduction in her timing, depending on, you know, what you equip. It could be Aquila or Roma first, or Aquila's second airstrike versus Roma's first strike, and then you'll have Veneto again, and that will be a very nice loop of damage that you can have. So that actually kind of settles a nice, if you want to, you know, be solo Italian for the backline. Of course, New Jersey's probably going to be better here, and that's kind of why Roma was an interesting choice here. This is not going to be something you're going to use for PvP, but this skill is, you know, a reduction in her salvo cooldown, so that's really good. Only the first one though, but it's still solid. Overall, Roma looks like a very good PvE ship. I wouldn't use this in PvP. I'd stick with my, you know, Mafia and not go with straight pure pizza. But Roma's pretty good though, and the only thing I'd say is she's really going to be relevant in situations like mob fleeting at late levels, so like World 14 mob fleet. That would probably be where I, you know, instantly think to put her. But that's also a very, very competitive spot. There's a lot of ships that are very good and going towards that, but she's certainly very good, and she is also a great barrage battleship. So any new player who's going to need barrage battleships, especially get past like World 9, 10, 11, she's going to be fantastic for that too. So if you're a new player, pick her up, and honestly, I'm going to pick her up too. She looks pretty solid, especially for a non-UR event. Next up, we have a submarine. Finally, the Italians get an SR submarine, and it's Leonardo Da Vinci, and I'm actually pretty excited to see what this submarine can do. Stat-wise, her torpedo stat is actually on the higher end. It's up there with U-96 or I-168. On top of that, she actually has a really good accuracy stat. So her baseline is going to be a little bit more powerful than a baseline archerfish. So let's see what her skills are going to do. Skill number 1, she gets 10% increase to torpedo stat and hit stat. And while that's not 18% potential that a Wolfpack can do, that is significant, especially since she has a already pretty high base. A lot of the Wolfpack is already, you know, their stats are lower than other submarines, and then they make it back up with their Wolfpack and grouping together. But this is a good start. It obviously doesn't make her better than the Wolfpack right away, but we'll see what the rest of the skill does. Damage against light armor plus 15%. That's important because I feel like there's not that many options for light armor bosses, so this is actually very good in that situation. And if she's using a Sardinia equipment, her torpedo and hit stat goes up another 10%, so she can get really boosted. That's actually going to be more than the 18% that most Wolfpack can do, so that's actually really, really good. Unfortunately, there are no gold submarine torpedoes that are Italian. There is a blue one, but you don't want to use that. Fortunately, you can just throw an Italian DD gun on her. She obviously doesn't need her DD gun for really anything of use, so you just, you know, throw it away. It's fine, and that torpedo and hit stat is totally worth it, even if you are using a purple crappy DD gun. Skill number 2, 3 seconds after entering the battle, she stops moving, summons a small kangaroo. And by the way, that kangaroo, I believe, is a historical reference to, you know, some things that she had in her manufacturing. She summons a mini robot, basically, so she's going to have an ally, kind of like Kashkent. The small kangaroo will move forward, starts attacking, and throws a sea mine. The sea mine triggered will cause flooding damage that is unstackable for 24 seconds, and then the small kangaroo will go back to Da Vinci. So she has this little ally that comes out 3 seconds after entering the battle. It lays a sea mine, and anyone who hits and runs into it will basically take 24 seconds of flooding damage, and it's guaranteed, so that's pretty good. And then when the kangaroo comes back to her, she will launch a barrage as well. So this actually looks interesting. It's kind of unique. We'll have to see exactly how the kangaroo moves because we can't see that necessarily in data mine. We can just kind of look at the stats. But if this kangaroo doesn't have some sort of moving bug, that seems like it will be pretty good. The next skill is she has plus 20 oxygen. So she gets to stay under for longer, which means you probably aren't going to have to need a snorkel on her. Actually, you don't think you will need a snorkel on her, which means you can double up on torpedo enhancing stats. But yeah, the point is you can actually double up on her torpedo stat rather than having something to deal with oxygen because of that. Although it's a pretty lackluster, oxygen is not as important as the other ones. She also gets 1 out of hunting range support. That just saves you a little bit of oil. You can always just move the range with oil, but if, it saves you a little bit of oil, but does nothing really in the battle per se. And then she has her all-out assault barrage when she enters the battle. So as a submarine, this actually looks fairly good. I'm definitely going to pick this one up. Obviously, submarines are very endgame content and pretty unnecessary until you get to, World 13, World 14. And even then, if your fleet's strong enough, you don't necessarily need them, although they are very helpful. But she's a very strong, independent submarine. She doesn't need anybody else. So unlike the Wolf Pack, you're not going to need to pair her with anything. You can literally throw her with any other submarine. So that's interesting. I definitely want to pick this one up. I don't necessarily think this is going to break the Wolf Pack meta. I think Wolf Pack meta is probably still the best way to go for your submarines. But interestingly enough, if you use the Sardinia gun and you're fighting against light armor, this actually might be pretty good, especially if you compare her with some of the other submarines that can't be put in the Wolf Pack. Something like I-13, which I always like using because of her ability to be timed with your main fleet firing. All right, we'll move on to the final SR in this event. It is the light cruiser Giuseppe Garibaldi. She is the sister of Duca, and I'm very excited for this one as well. You can obtain her as a map drop as well as in the event shop, so this is basically like the guaranteed one if you play the event. Stat-wise, she has identical torpedo stat, and I assume she's going to be torpedo related just like her sister. She gives up a little bit of health in exchange for some extra accuracy, so I prefer that. Notably though, she gives up 10% of her torpedo efficiency for 10% extra main gun efficiency, or in this case, light cruiser gun efficiency. That's not a trade-off that I really prefer. Maybe she'll be focused more on the firepower, but she's not particularly a firepower stat ship. I'd rather focus and kind of min-max towards the torpedo like Duca is, but we'll see what she does. There's a lot of things I could do with her skills, and we'll see what she actually does. But keep in mind, torpedo-wise, she's actually going to be weaker than her sister because of that efficiency, but main gun-wise, she's going to be a little bit stronger. And because she's a light cruiser, that's not an equal trade-off. Light cruisers deal a lot more damage in torpedoes than they do in firepower most of the time, especially this specific class of light cruisers. Skill number 1, her firepower, torpedo stat, and reload stat are plus 15% for the first 60 seconds into the battle. That's a long time. That's basically the whole PvP battle. So in PvP, that's great. And in most mobbing, that's going to be the whole battle. So really, this is only in very extended boss fights are we really going to lose this buff. I should note that Duca has a skill similarly worded to this, but instead of getting firepower, torpedo, and reload, she's going to get anti-air, evasion, and accuracy. For that reason, I think actually Duca has a worse skill. I think the firepower, torpedo, and reload is going to be better for the ship. Unlike Duca's skill though, Garibaldi procs a barrage 3 seconds after the battle starts, and every 20 seconds after the start of the battle, she will have a 70% chance to proc a barrage as well. So this comes out at 3 seconds guaranteed, and then 20, 40, 60, etc. at a 70% chance each time. This adds some extra damage, and it's worded different than Duca's skill, which is based on when the torpedoes fire, but effectively these will be very similar in what they do. Moving on to skill number 2, self-damage against destroyers and light cruisers is increased by 15%. This can be pretty good in situations where you're dealing with a boss that is a destroyer or a light cruiser, although a lot of the bosses are actually carriers or battleships, so that's unfortunate. But in PvP, a lot of the damage she's going to have to deal against is actually against enemy vanguards, so those will likely be destroyers and light cruisers in PvP, so that's pretty good. I'll take damage. It's 15%. That's non-negligible. That's like raw damage on top. It's just limited to 2 ship ship types, but they are decently common ship types. Not the most common, but decently common. 20 seconds after the battle, current torpedo reload time is reduced by 20 seconds. Her speed is reduced by 8. Her self-damage is increased by 15%. The damage she would take, she gets a reduction by 6%. All those last until the end of the battle in terms of the stats. So this is kind of worded very complex, but we'll break it down. So the speed stat, she actually decreases her speed, so she gets slower, which is actually pretty bad. That's not really good. Duca has a slow, but it slows her torpedo speed, not her own speed. Slowing the torpedo speed is actually good in something like PvP. Slowing your own speed is almost always bad. You typically want to go fast. Gotta go fast. So that's not good. Self-damage increased by 15. That's good. Self-damage resistance is gonna go up by 6%. That's good. And they do last until the end of the battle. So that's all pretty good. Those only come in, though, 20 seconds after the battle starts. Now, the current reload time is going to be only for the current torpedo at the time that it procs, which is at the 20 seconds after the battle. So it doesn't like happen every time after that. It only happens for that one time. It reduces the reload time to 20 seconds. Now, most gold torpedoes put on her would yield a time between 21, 24, whatever seconds. Her reload time doesn't allow a torpedo to be under 20 seconds for her base skills and stats, which makes this kind of weird because it basically just turns any torpedo you put on her to firing at 20 seconds instead of whatever it would. So if you were to fire like a Rainbow Quinn torpedoes, she would fire, instead of firing at like 24 or 25 seconds, she would fire at 20 seconds. So it's a weird way of reducing the time. It's definitely worse than how Duca reduces it, but there is kind of a really interesting part. So you can actually get lower than 20 seconds. You can do this with purple torpedoes. You can do it with blue torpedoes. These you don't want to do because that will significantly reduce the damage, because all of these buffs are basing on the base damage that the equipment you have on her has. And so by lowering that significantly with a purple torpedoes, that's really bad. But in theory, that would get you under the 20-second mark, which means she would fire those and then she would be attempting to reload again. And the current reload timer at the 20-second mark would minus 20 seconds. And she would basically fire immediately at the 20-second mark. So let's say you were able to get it down to, say, 19 seconds. You would fire at the 19 seconds and the 20 seconds. Of course, she has a preloaded, so you'd fire at the 1 second, the 19 seconds, and the 20 seconds. So it could potentially be a double fire. This gets pretty complicated because you need to get her under 20 seconds. Now, let's say you wanted to get a gold torpedo under 20 seconds. You can kind of technically do that. You have to oath her and get her to 200 affinity. That will boost the reload stat that she has. Additionally, that's not enough. You're going to need a special item. You're going to need a plus 13 gold burn, and that is a hard item to obtain. And once you get that, you'll actually have the reload stat to get to like 19.8 seconds or so mathematically for a quad rainbow torpedoes, not quins, but quads. And that theoretically should be able to get you 2 fires, like at 19.8 and 20. The short end is it's going to be a lot of effort to barely get off this double torpedo, but it looks like it's possible, potentially, but it's a lot of effort. And at the end of the day, what are you getting? You're getting 1 extra fire. This is something that Emden already does. Shimikaze gets 2 preloaded. Duca already has a cooldown reductions that's very easy to trigger and happens at the 10-second mark. So it's kind of complicated, but the payout is something that we've already basically been able to get. And once again, her torpedo efficiency is less than Duca already, and that's not great. Although she does have torpedo stat boosting from her first skill, so that's actually pretty good. But I don't know how I feel about that one. It's a very complicated skill. Moving on to skill number 3, she gets minus 20% damage taken from AP damage. This is very similar to Duca. Duca has the same thing basically, and like I said, when Duca came out, a light armor, light cruiser taking reduced AP damage is not necessarily where she's going to be getting most of her damage. Most of her damage is going to be coming from, HE or something like that. I mean, it can really punish people in PvP who are just AP everything because they want to kill enemy medium armor and heavy armor. So it can punish them a little bit. But yeah, that's an interesting one. Instead of having the reduction to torpedo damage like her sister, she instead has a 15% chance to generate 2 shields when she's attacked. I assume that means like when she successfully takes damage, and it applies similar to how Eldridge takes hers. But anyway, each of the time that she has that that she generates 2 shields, and each shield blocks 2 torpedoes, so a potential to block 4 torpedoes. They last 10 seconds, and there's a 20-second cooldown, so at most, she can only be up 50% of the time. 15% chance is actually a pretty good chance at proccing these shields, because every shot, she has a chance of proccing it, and it's like constant as long as she's not on cooldown. Cooldown's a little long, but it seems pretty good. When HP drops below 30%, she heals herself 10%. That can proc once per battle. Very similar to Duca's heal, but also pretty good. Finally, for her all-out assault, it's actually going to be special. Instead of, she has her basic all-out assault every 8 shots, like usual. And then at the start of the battle, if there are 3 or more Italians in a fleet, she gets a special enhanced all-out assault. So you're going to want to put her with 2 other Italians, which it was interesting. They've not really buffed up all-out assaults that much, so this is an interesting direction here. So as far as what she is, honestly, she seems worse than Duca, but she is not bad. It's certainly very good, and if you don't have Duca, she's certainly a viable option replacement, but I still prefer Duca in most situations because it's less convoluted to get her to work. She's more min-maxed, but Garibaldi is kind of interesting in how she functions, at least, and I certainly do like that they brought her here. Okay, let's move in quickly through the elites. I'm not going to spend too much time on them. We're going to go through them really quickly. So first up, we have the elite destroyer Alfredo Oriani. She's got elite destroyer stats and Italian elite destroyer stats, so especially bad. So we're not going to spend too much time on that. For skills, when she is leading, when she's the first ship, her damage reduction is plus 10%. That's good, but who wants to put your less than 2000 HP elite destroyer light armor ship front and center of your vanguard? She also launches a flare 10 seconds after the start of the battle with 40% chance to use it again every 10 seconds afterwards. So this is actually kind of interesting. So she has a flare. This is good for World 14, you know, something like Sendai. There's reasons flares are really good in World 14. And also flares, if you don't know, they reduce evasion rate by 25%, or hers does at least. It doesn't stack with other flares and things like that in the last 10 seconds. So these actually are pretty good for revealing things and, you know, getting through very evasion heavy ships. The fact that it tries to trigger every 10 seconds afterward is nice, but 40% is kind of low, but the first one's guaranteed, so you know, you could use that. Also, her damage against enemy in a flare range is plus 15%. That would be nice if she could deal any damage. She's not necessarily built for that. I guess her torpedoes are half decent. Maybe her second skill will be better. Every 20 seconds, self evasion plus 15% for 5 seconds, so that's up 1/4 of the time. When an Italian ship falls below 30%, she deploys a smoke screen, which increases her evasion rate by 40%. Actually, everyone's in the smoke screen. It lasts 5 seconds and doesn't stack with any other smoke screens. So this is a smoke screen. Now, this smoke screen is almost indefinitely worse than Malstrale's smokescreen, although Malstrale just really has a smokescreen. But I would say that this is probably a worse smokescreen than Malstrale, but it does increase her evasion, and she does have the flare. And then her last skill is just an all-out assault. I'd say that I'd probably prefer Malstrale unless you need the flare. The flare is nice, so, you know, you could use the flare, but overall, I think this is a good ship design because, you know, you can't have every ship be amazing. So it does have utility in being a smokescreen and a flare and Italian and there, but it's not very good per se. All right, next up we have the elite heavy cruiser Bolzano, and stat-wise she looks awful. Like, she's a light armor heavy cruiser. She's a torpedo heavy cruiser, so she gives up her extra, like, firing gun. And she doesn't have good torpedo stat on top of that, and her firepower is even lower than other torpedo-based heavy cruisers and significantly lower than the firepower heavy cruisers, so she is very bad stat-wise. Her first skill, self-damage taken from AP shots, is minus 20%. Basically the same thing as Duca and Garibaldi, but it's also, she's light armor, so it, once again, the same problem. When her main gun fires, she gets self-evasion plus 15% for 2 seconds. I was gonna say that's actually not bad, and then I realized it only applies for 2 seconds, but I guess it doesn't have a cooldown, and that's actually really interesting. So you probably want to have her firing a really fast gun so she can continually proc this over and over. There's nothing that says she can't have this over and over again. I don't think it does. Maybe it even stacks if you fire twice within 2 seconds, although she's a heavy cruiser, so that's not really going to happen because she, is going to have to fire a heavy cruiser gun. So that's not really a thing. I guess it doesn't really matter because she's a heavy cruiser. I guess I'm more thinking like if she was a destroyer gun that she could equip or something like that, it would be pretty busted, but this isn't that great. Her evasion, yeah. All right, skill number 2. Every 20 seconds, 60% chance to increase her firepower by 40% for 10 seconds. Okay, so it doesn't do it at the start. It's 20 seconds in. It's only 60%. It only lasts for 10 seconds. And 40% of a low firepower is still... 40% is a lot. That's a big boost, but she's not going to be doing a lot of damage anyway. And then her last one's all out assault. This is a trash ship. This ship is complete garbage. Like, no utility. Get it for the fleet tech only. What does she have for her fleet tech? 1 firepower for heavy cruisers, so I guess that's decent. All right, moving on, we have the final Italian ship of the event, the elite destroyer Emanuelle Pessagno. You can get her as an accumulation reward. Likewise, she has elite Italian destroyer stats, which are, to say, not good. So let's move into the skills. When this ship takes damage, her self, anti-air, and evasion stats are up 5%. That stacks a max of 3 times, so 15% total. So that's actually anytime she takes damage, so that's pretty easy to get, and I don't think there's a cooldown. Also, the first 3 battles of a sortie, she gets plus 15% firepower and torpedo stat. She's not going to deal a ton of damage, but I'll take the 15% torpedo stat. Why not? Only the first 3 battles of the sortie, though. It's a fun little qualifier that's not really needed, but I guess it's there. Moving on to skill number 2. When the Vanguard falls below 20% HP, that ship gets minus 50% damage taken for 8 seconds. This procs once per battle. That's really interesting. So the first Vanguard ship to fall below 20% is going to get a 50% damage reduction. Honestly, this ship is probably going to be her. She's like the weakest, flimsiest ship possible, so it's probably going to be her, and it can proc on herself, but in theory, if it was to proc on like an anchorage, which it never would if she's in the fleet probably, but she'd have 50% damage taken reduced, which is really good. But once again, this is only procs once per battle. It's going to proc on the first time of the first ship that falls low. She's going to be the first one that falls low. And at 20% HP, even the 50% damage reduction probably won't do very much. If a teammate dies, she gets to heal 10% HP. Given that she's probably going to be the first one dying anyway, that's not great. So this ship needs to take damage. Yeah, this ship needed like 5,000 HP for its skills to take damage, to get the evasion, and to do the reduction. I feel like if this was a heavy cruiser with heavy armor or medium armor and like 5,000 or 6,000 HP, these 2 skills on her could actually be kind of fun and decent, but given she is a light armor, like 1900 HP, not even 1900 HP ship, that's not very good. All right, so that's the event, but we also are getting Trento META. Trento META comes on August 1st, so it doesn't come during this update, but it did get released in the, patch notes as part of the data mine, so we'll talk about her here. She's obviously a heavy cruiser, just like Trento herself, and light armor, and all of her stats are pretty much being Trento. Trento is still Trento. Now, let's see what her skills do. When she or a main fleet ship takes damage, 70% chance to fire a barrage, and there's 10% cooldown between activations. So, the when you take damage part, that actually has a lot of parts to trigger, because she's a heavy cruiser in the Vanguard fleet, and also the main fleet is going to be taking damage, so that can trigger a lot, although it does have a 10-second cooldown and 70% chance. Okay, it's not great, but it is going to be happening quite frequently, it looks like. Skill number 2, self firepower plus 12%. When the ship takes damage, 20% chance to increase 10% firepower and torpedo stat until the end of the battle. Now, the way I read this, it looks like that would be able to stack. Like, that could be really interesting. So she starts with 12% firepower just base, and then every time she takes damage, she has a 5th chance to just like keep stacking. I don't see a max stacks here, and because I see a 20% chance of happening, I would assume that that can happen over and over again, which the triggering condition is anytime she takes damage. Now, she has terrible health, so maybe she won't have it, but this seems like this could get really broken. Infinite stacks here, but in actuality, this probably is not very good. She's got terrible base stats and likely won't survive very long in most situations. And also, this could just be miscoded or mistranslated or something like that, or I'm interpreting it wrong. But the way I interpret this is every time she takes damage, 20% chance, and it doesn't say max stack 1. So that would be pretty crazy if it does stack infinitely. Like, it would be something like Ranger, where it's not really that good, but it'd be fun to just like make videos about infinite stacks or infinite damage or whatever. Skill number 3, when vanguards are damaged, 50% chance to proc a vanguard shield. That lasts for 10 seconds or blocks 6 bullets, whatever, happens first. 15-second cooldown on that. So once again, a lot of damage needs to be taken. Also, she's a vanguard, so once again, when she takes damage, so this is like an enhanced version of when she takes damage, because it can be anyone in the front line. She fires the shields. The first proc of the shield, her evasion goes up by 15% until the end of the battle. So the first time that any vanguard takes damage and the shield procs, this procs at 50%. That's actually pretty good, but it does have a cooldown. This one does specifically have a cooldown, so it doesn't have it like infinitely stack. But yeah, the evasion is nice, but only the first time. And then she has her just, 6 main gun shots. So Trento META is actually probably not very good, but that second skill, I'm very skeptical that it does what I think it does. But if it does that, that seems like it's pretty abusable, but also probably not worth it given all the rest of how bad she is. Anyway, guys, that is the data mine and all of the ships in this new event. I wish you guys the best of luck polling. If you guys want to poll with me, I'm going to be here on YouTube. There's going to be a stream tomorrow, which I will be streaming polls. I'll be finishing the event, hopefully on the first day, clearing the EX mode, completing through it. So come on, die. This is going to be a perfect opportunity to grind your PR5 ships in this event. And so, yeah, please do come by the stream tomorrow here on YouTube. Take care, guys, and until next time.